Joining me in studio to speak more about that move, Siya Kolisi is our sports reporter, Yolulwe Qoshe. Yolulwe, a very good evening. Thank you so much for coming into studio. What do you make of this move, Siya Kolisi?
Well, first and foremost, a very good evening to you, Buhle, as well as to our viewers, of course. Well, I think it's a fantastic move, to be honest with you, Buhle. I look at it in three folds, really. I look at as a player, you know, what else can he have done in South African rugby? I look at the financial aspects of it as well. And I also look at the journey of the human being as well. And we're going through those particular aspects. I mean, you look at the player himself, you know, he's played for the Stormers. He captained the Stormers for quite some time. And he went to the Sharks, where he's now captain of the Sharks. So he's basically paid his dues, earned his stripes in South African rugby, you know. And then we're looking at the financial aspect of the move. Kolisi is 32 years old in 2023, you know, and we know that rugby is not a long career. There's lots of injuries as well. So you have to at some point look at, you know, your financial situation. And when you get to that point of your career, sort of like not really the twilight, but towards that twilight, you start to look for moves, that big contract that's going to set you up for life after rugby. And I think with all of the things that he's done in South African rugby, going all the way to becoming a Springbok captain, lifting the Webb Ellis Trophy, first black captain to lift the Webb Ellis Trophy, has earned this type of move to make sure that himself and his family will be set for quite some time, hopefully after his rugby career.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought that would have been the case. But now, why now? Why not after winning the World Cup? Why not after his contract with the Sharks ran out?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I remember in 2019 as well, I asked myself that question as one of the few people that said, okay, why don't you take... it's like people say in gambling, really, you know, winners know when to quit. Once you've hit the jackpot, why don't you take your earnings and leave, you know? Right. Against all odds, he made it to that Rugby World Cup, where they had an injury-ridden season for the Stormers. It was being managed by South African rugby. But against all odds, he made it to that World Cup. It was inspirational for the Springboks. And then he won that particular tournament. And look, he became a massive figure for South African rugby. He became a massive sporting figure, but also his influence transcended just the sporting realm. You know, he became a huge symbol of success and a symbol of, you know, inspiration to the youth in South Africa, you know, and globally his status took off. So maybe because of everything that was happening around him, his best place to have that influence was South Africa. So had he left right after the 2019 World Cup, would have not been here to experience just how big, you know, the impact he has made in that World Cup was. You know, a lot of campaigns were also pulling him left, right, and center at the time. And he probably as a person also understood that he still had a role to play in society just beyond rugby in the country. So it was more than just a rugby decision to stay. That's why I think of it.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I mean, Kolisi became a global icon because of the Rugby World Cup, because he won, and everything that happened after that has since happened. He says he wants to spend more time with his family. And you mentioned the fact that he had, you know, he then went into a time where he had certain commitments, and he was signed by Rock Sport, and he then had to do all these things in the public eye. I don't understand when he says, you know, spending time with his family is going to happen in France. I feel like he will have the same type of commitments. He'll still have to go to training. He'll still travel. So how does that pan out?
I think, Buhle, in terms of that, you mentioned Rock Sport, Rock Nation, who are probably the most influential in that schedule that he has off the field with the campaigns. I'm sure before he put pen to paper, there would have been those conversations where he would speak to them and say, listen, guys, I understand my position right now, you know. Rock Nation would have come to him and they would have probably earmarked him as a person if they, of course, wanted to tap into the rugby market. He's the number one guy to go to right now, you know. It's also a symbol of transformation, which is massive at the moment, you know. And he had just won a World Cup, so there's a whole vibe about him, you know. So when Rock Nation would have gone to him, it would have been a matter of strike while the iron is still hot. They would have understood that it wasn't going to be hot forever. They probably would have had those conversations. They probably would have known how long that period of influence was going to last for the campaigns. And he would have told them, listen, guys, at some point, I just want to ease down on those commitments, go somewhere far away, be with my family, and enjoy my last bit as a rugby player. but also bond with my family as well. And I think France is the right environment for that. Yes, of course, he will still have the rugby commitments. He will still train. He will still be a part of campaigns.
He'll still be a known figure.
Of course, but the magnitude of being known. Let's not forget France is more of a football-crazed nation. So, for instance, maybe he will get recognized when he walks in the mall, but let's say maybe 20 as opposed to 100 people will notice him when he goes to a mall, unlike in South Africa where he'll probably be hogged everywhere he goes, and it'll be hard for him to have a meal at a restaurant.
Yeah, I would believe that definitely is the case. So Kolisi is now out here trying to essentially, we call it secure the bag. But I'd think that he's already secured the bag. We've seen this happen time and time again in the rugby world, especially South African rugby. Players get to that twilight zone. They've achieved what they could achieve with the national squad, and then they leave to make pounds and euros. Essentially, they ensure that they're good for retirement. Now, is that the case for Kolisi? Is he just securing the bag as well in this? And could this, open up for more players of color to do the same? We don't have a lot of black players playing abroad at the moment, especially superstars.
Yeah, Butle, you see, that's actually an interesting way of looking at it for Siya Kolisi, because it's not just the average, black player going abroad. When it comes to Siya Kolisi, of course, a lot of this aspect is about securing the bag. But had he stayed in South Africa, I don't think he would have been too badly hit in terms of his pocket after his career with rugby. I mean, this is a guy who's probably on a decent package, to say the least, for the Springboks. A senior player at the Sharks, and he was a senior player at the Storms as well. So he wouldn't have been on peanuts for years now. So he would have had a substantial amount of money. And either way, a player like Siya Kolisi, because he's marketable, because he's able to articulate himself in English, which is necessary when you're going into the rugby structures, he can come back into the system and be a coach. He can be an analyst. He can be a commentator, so he can be useful and get money in other ways in the sport, So it isn't a must that he goes to Europe to get the bag.
Okay.
But it is also a different type of bag, than what it does financially for him will set him up for the future. And in terms of the players coming after him, well, it can necessitate a mentality shift. I've been in conversations with people close to some of the black rugby players, prominent rugby players. And when you hear the conversations about their mentalities, about why they're not taking certain moves, because they're comfortable where they are and they love the culture of the certain unions that they are, and they're afraid to take that leap into a bit of cultural shock. Maybe when they see a player like Siya Kolisi, what he symbolizes, the background he has come from, take that leap, and should he be successful in his tenure in France, then maybe he can change the mentalities of some of his teammates at the Sharks and other players in the similar age bracket in South African rugby. But also, he might inspire the young kids coming from high school. They might see a totally different path altogether.
Yeah.
We might be going into an era where we see young black players, or young players in general, totally skip our South African unions and decide, okay, what I want from rugby is to have a financially secured future after rugby. So I don't have to stay here in South Africa fighting to be a Springbok, while I can go to France, Japan, and start off well on a financial scale. Then maybe if I'm good enough, I'll have that conversation of becoming a Springbok and coming back to South Africa to try and fulfill that type of dream. So Kolisi really gives the youth in South Africa two ways to approach their rugby careers, and two ways in which they can then build their own legacies. Really.
Very quickly on what you said, don't you think that will create some sort of a skills drain, similar to what the selection policy had tried to prevent before Rassie Erasmus came in and did that?
Listen, Butle, we in South Africa, there's so many players of a huge caliber, high quality players coming out of our high school structures, players coming out of our provincial structures that don't even get contracted. We've got players that do get contracted, and then they still don't make it through the system. They fail at under 21 level.
Yeah.
They fail at under 19 level. So what I'm trying to say, which is, no matter how many players we lose, we'll always have a surplus that's left. So I don't think we will be hurt too much. And I think South Africa, just the way that we are as a rugby playing country, the way that we develop our rugby players, the structures in South African rugby, I think we will always be able to let that pipeline come through with some quality players, regardless of what path the youngsters coming up are taking. A lot of those players already I'm seeing are taking parts. I know a few kids straight from high school have gone from France and not even being picked for South African schools, because they've already made it known that their path is to try to make a bit of money for themselves in France rather than to become the next Siya Kolisi. But hopefully we can manage both scales, people make money, and we continue to produce Springboks of a high caliber.
Yeah, of course, that then brings up the argument of natural citizens. Do we keep them? Do they play for South Africa? But those are other discussions that indeed myself and Yolulwe will have to unpack at a later stage. Fascinating stuff, that move by Siya Kolisi.